Well, in a dramatic escalation of trade tensions, US President Donald Trump has slapped steep tariffs ranging from 10% to as high as 50%. This next report delves into the sweeping action and its global implications. Take a look.
US President Donald Trump slapped steep tariffs on dozens of countries ahead of a Friday trade deal deadline that has now expired. An executive order signed Thursday sets rates for 35% on many goods from Canada, while Brazil was hit with a 50% tariff. In all, goods from 67 countries, the EU and Taiwan will get hit in a week's time, 7 days after the August 1st deadline. Any not on that list get a 10% tax, lower than Trump had previously said. Canada's rates, however, were set in a separate order to 35%, up from 25%. In it, Trump said Canada had failed to cooperate in curbing illicit flows of narcotics into the US. Trump complained to reporters earlier that Canada had been very poorly led. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said he was disappointed by Trump's decision and vowed to take action. It was all in sharp contrast to Mexico, which was given a 90-day extension to give more time to hash out a broader trade deal. Meanwhile, China is facing an August 12th deadline to reach a longer-lasting tariff deal. Beijing and Washington had only reached preliminary agreements in May and June to end their back-and-forth escalation in tariffs and a cutoff of rare earth materials. When Trump first announced his trade policies in April, they sparked a sell-off in the markets. But this time, reaction has so far been more muted. Stocks and equity futures fell modestly in Friday morning trading in Asia.
For more on this, we're now being joined by Greg Swenson, economist and founding partner of Greg McAdam, a London-based merchant bank. Welcome to Race to Power, Mr. Swenson. First up, of course, the billion-dollar question. Do you think Trump is using trade as a weapon right now?
Well, absolutely he is. It's a negotiating tool. I'm not sure, maybe a weapon might be a bit provocative, but yeah, he's very effective at using trade, and not only for the interest of the United States, but look how he's used trade or the threat of tariffs on, to settle conflicts around the world, with Thailand, for example, and Cambodia, as well as the DRC and Rwanda. And so there's several examples that of where he's used business or tariffs or trade, generally speaking, as a negotiating tactic, and it's worked. It really has.
Mr. Swenson, of course, you mentioned that Trump has been using trade as a negotiating tactic, and right now he's tied geopolitical issues with trade. How is that going to impact U.S. ties, America's ties with big economies, not just India, but also like Canada?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think, the conflict, I'll call it a conflict, or the disagreement with Canada right now and Mark Carney, that's, I think, isolated to Canada. I don't think the president was particularly impressed with Mr. Carney. And so, and obviously they're quite divergent politically. But I do think, if you look at the largest trading partners outside of North America, the president has achieved some fantastic trade deals. If you look at Japan, for example, obviously China is still negotiating, but Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, India, and Vietnam. And most importantly, back to your question about, negotiating tactics or using trade as a weapon, India has already stopped buying Russian oil. And that's really impressive that, the threat of 25% tariffs on India. And I think they got the message, and already, they've just this week ceased the purchase of Russian oil, and it's a really important moment for geopolitical relations. And also, remember, I think the president is looking to make sure that China and Russia aren't in too much of a partnership, and I think that's going to be an important part of the negotiations with China.
Mr. Swenson, India has clearly said that it will take actions in its own national interest. Nothing radical has come out whether it will stop buying Russian oil or not at this point of time. But my last question to you, do you think that what we're seeing right now would be Trump's last word or action when it comes to tariffs?
I don't think so. I mean, it's always going to be fluid, and the president is not afraid to pivot, when circumstances change. And I know that's difficult for business decision makers and also markets to have that uncertainty. I think what we're all hoping for is these deals are put in place now. They're, around the world, amazing number of trade deals negotiated and signed already. And I think in those circumstances, you can assume some certainty on those tariff rates and on non-tariff trade barriers as well, like Japan opening up to agricultural markets, especially rice, American-produced rice. And so I think you'll see some certainty. But I do think in some of the more open negotiations, like China, like Canada, I think you'll see some more uncertainty, and I think that will ultimately settle down.
Right. Right, Mr. Swenson, thank you so much for joining us here on Race to Power.